To end this module dedicated to services, we would like to give you an insightful perspective about the future of services. And this is why we have Olaf Reise, a senior partner in the Boston Consulting Group in the Düsseldorf offices. He's leading the service operation topic. Hi, Olaf.
Hello, Salvatore.
Thanks for being with us. So we heard a lot about this fourth revolution in services, the Service 4.0. Can you tell us in a nutshell what is this?
Yeah, Service 4.0 for us means the advance of service industries, but also of service functions through new technologies. So, for example, robotics, artificial intelligence. And that has two components. On the one hand, the way services are delivered, so everything around operational excellence, but also the services that are delivered themselves that might change due to this revolution.
Thank you. And what is the potential improvement in service?
So the potential improvement is huge. As you know, talking about customer satisfaction in the first place, a lot of customers are dissatisfied with the service they receive today, in particular customer service in service industries, in banks, in telcos, etc. And there's a huge potential to advance this customer experience by leveraging new technologies. On the other hand, there is also a lot of cost efficiency potential, where tasks that are currently performed manually, which are often faulty, but also, of course, costly, because human labor is expensive, can be replaced by more automated, up to the point of fully automated, and often also better delivered ways. So the improvement is potential is huge. We assume that up to 50% of the overall cost base in many industries can be affected, and a lot of that can at the end be really replaced by very simple and very cost-efficient ways. So up to 40–50% of cost efficiency.
Wow, this is a big number. And what company has already demonstrated this potential? Do you have any examples?
So we see a lot of examples of companies now moving into that direction. In banking, a lot of the larger banks have experimented and also scaled up initiatives when it comes, for example, to robotic process automation. I'm sure we will come to that in greater detail. But also telcos. Telcos are among those industries that show currently the lowest customer satisfaction. So I think everybody can relate to that, having their own stories, war stories of how telco customer service treated them. So there's a lot going on there as well. But also insurers, energy utility providers, and so on.
Okay, so not just cost reduction, but also client satisfaction. This is very interesting. And how the Service 4.0 integrate with the traditional lean effort?
So obviously a faulty process that bears a lot of waste will be very difficult to automate and to optimize by new technologies without really understanding where the root causes of the waste in processes are. So typically a lot of the principles of traditional lean optimization need to be still applied when leveraging those new technologies. But what we then see is that often we see a combination of traditional process optimization, for example, through value stream mapping, but then leveraging new technologies to leapfrog certain elements of the Kaizen phase. So use these technologies then as a tool to improve even beyond what is possible without them. To give you an example, of course, one can optimize a process that is a manual process, reduce process steps, reduce interfaces, reduce therefore waste and faults without using these new technologies. That is then traditional lean. But now, and I mentioned that robotic process automation as an example, would be now a new technology that can be put on top of this optimized process and even further automated, even further remove human labor and therefore ways to make mistakes in this process. So that brings down the error rate even further.
Okay, so it sounds like we really have to use these new technologies when we will do some Kaizen or lean, in general, lean effort. You were talking about new technologies. Which one is the most impactful in your opinion?
Yeah, so as always with new technologies, it's not so easy to judge in advance which one will really be the killer app. But we see a lot of different technologies emerging, of which I believe they probably all have a relevance. Let me mention a few. Big data. I mean, this is of course a buzzword that everybody knows. It will have a huge impact also when it comes to service operations. For example, being able to analyze patterns in data that help you to spot flaws in the operations early on. I mentioned, for example, preventive maintenance, so or preventive fault repair. So again, in a telco, if we take this example, through big data analysis, understand in advance when some part of the equipment will break down, so that it actually doesn't break down, but you replace it beforehand. That is possible today. And is possible through the advance of big data. Also, when it comes to customer satisfaction again, anticipating what customer needs might be and give the customer a call in advance so that he doesn't have to call in and complain. So that's again something that is driven by customer analytics and big data. Another technology that is on the rise is artificial intelligence. Companies like IBM with IBM Watson, but also a lot of others now manage to build engines that replace a lot of the intelligence in a lot of functions that humans basically bring into service processes. Really up to the point that the engine is able to make informed decision, context dependent, and also recipient dependent. So depending on who is actually calling, again, an example, in a call center, you're calling into a call center and instead of a human being, you have some kind of avatar answering. And he will not answer in a just technical sense, but he will answer depending on who you are, depending on how your mood is, depending on, of course, the case that is at hand, and he will make informed decision. And you might not be even able to tell whether you dealt with a human being or whether you dealt with an engine. So that may sound like science fiction still, but is actually available today as a solution. A third key technology that I believe will be very important and is already now at the horizon is robotic process automation. I mentioned that. So replacing complex processes that leverage a lot of different systems and system complexity and legacy. For those processes, instead of human beings, use robots, which are software programs that sit on top of the legacy applications and basically use the process the way a human being would use it. So they don't require much integration into the legacy systems, which is their advantage. So you can apply them pretty quickly. So even in situations where the legacy IT roadmap is pretty complex and again would require a lot of integration effort, they can be used pretty well, and that is also the reason why, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of companies are experimenting with that because they can be deployed very well. And there are a couple of other technologies out there, for example, virtual reality. Just imagine a field engineer, a technician doing your home installation, instead of looking at his handbook or manual, or instead of looking at his iPad when doing some installation and getting some technical advice, might have some virtual glasses on that give him, on site the instructions of how to repair something. That is also something that is at the horizon. Also, by the way, for call center agents that have now better ways to communicate with the computer interface while doing customer interactions.
Okay, all this looks like a great opportunity for both companies and the customers. But is there any challenge with this new trend?
Sure. I mean, as with every new trend, there are challenges. First of all, I think as most of these technologies are rather new, there is not much experience to be built on when applying them. So there are a lot of suppliers out there of which it is not yet proven to the full extent of what the capabilities are. And from a client point of view, a client talking now about our clients, the large corporations that seek our advice, they often ask, okay, so what is the right use case in the first place, but then also the right technology for that use case. And there's a matching problem. Of course, over time, experience will show what the right combinations are, but at the moment, this is, of course, one of the challenges. Then picking the right use cases. Things that at first sight might qualify very well for applying these technologies might over time prove not to be the right ones. And others might emerge where one might have not thought about. Currently, there are a lot of use cases where these technologies are used. I mentioned a couple, for example, front-end in customer service, but also a lot of back-end processes, things that happen out in the field, around field engineers, etc. There might be other use cases that we don't think of yet that even prove further potential. Then last but not least, I think integrating those new technologies now with the ongoing IT transformation efforts that most of these companies have. We're talking IT here. And when we talk about IT in a legacy world, and all big corporations, be it insurers, be it banks, be it utilities, be it telcos, have a huge legacy complexity problem. So whenever you touch this legacy, it's getting complex, it's getting costly, it takes time. So those technologies that require a deep integration into legacy system need to be somehow integrated in the IT transformation roadmap. But as I said earlier, in the context of robotic process automation, the advantage of a lot of those technologies is that some of them don't require this deep integration, so can be put kind of over the top, on top of the legacy world, which gives them an advantage. So therefore, a fast implementation. And all that requires skills, requires new skills, right? While so far the focus of our clients was, of course, to build a qualified workforce to deliver services, it is now to build qualified workforce to build and integrate these new technologies, which require completely different skills. For example, big data analytics instead of pure service delivery. So building these new technology building these new capabilities is a great challenge as well.
Okay, so what should managers do to take a real advantage of this fourth revolution?
So first of all, they should be aware of it, and they should be aware of the huge potential that it bears. I mentioned the 40 to 50% earlier, just in cost base, but of course the customer experience comes on top. Therefore, it is probably the biggest single opportunity that we've seen for many years now in advancing of service industries. And therefore, it should be seen as a top management topic. I think that's important. So it should be on the top management agenda, and it should be thought through holistically. Holistically in the sense of comprehensively screening a company for the respective use cases where those technologies can come into play, but also understanding then what is required as an enabler to make it work. Because of course there's also some investment needed to get it done. I mentioned capabilities. There is of course IT investment to be freed up, etc. And then we believe that it requires a comprehensive view on a roadmap from an IT perspective, but also the other components that I mentioned, humans, human labor, skills, etc., that need to be put together in a holistic manner. The advantage of a lot of those technologies is that you can pilot them, that you can start small. So starting small, assessing the potential, learning on the go in an agile way is also something that we would recommend to do.
The famous minimum viable product.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is very interesting. What are the prerequisites that are necessary to start this adventure of Service 4.0?
So you need to have a good command and understanding of where your current challenges are. This sounds like a trivial thing, but a lot of companies don't know that. They don't know where the root causes of their current problems are, and they don't know what the most faulty processes are. So we would typically recommend to do a lean scan, a traditional lean scan, to understand, okay, which type of wastes, do I have in which processes? Understanding this is a first prerequisite, because you then, when defining a roadmap to Service 4.0, you would typically start with some processes that, of course, bear some waste, because you want to create lighthouses, showcases early on in the processes, in this transformation. The second is then, as I mentioned, skills. So you need to define, who is commanding such an effort with the required skills, and then put it under a governance that is sustainable. Is it something, such a transformation effort, that is run on a function-by-function basis? So, for example, within the customer service function, so the call center, or is it something that is run across the board? So, Service 4.0, so to say, a representative on C-level that is overseeing things that go on in sales, service, technology, etc., also to benefit from end-to-end components that, as we know, are often the key issue in waste and processes.
Okay, thank you. Can you describe a typical implementation journey?
So typical implementation journey would start with this lean scan that I mentioned earlier, so getting an understanding of where the biggest sources of waste are. Then a small pilot that you would run in one of the more wasteful areas, and in parallel, the development of the broader roadmap, so understanding which use cases are addressed in which order, and what the implications for the more legacy back-end systems are, and therefore, of course, also then the required effort to improve those systems, the interfaces that need to be built, etc. So after one or two pilots, we would then get into a scale-up phase, as we call it, which would address then the other use cases on a systematic manner, and also cater for the required changes in the legacy system. And that can then be, while the pilots are a pretty quick thing, can be done in 3-4 months, then the scale up is of course a larger effort that can take up to 1-2 years to get completed in the full sense.
Okay, and can you tell us a few critical success factors of this journey?
So getting the governance right is, in my experience, probably the most important success factor. And that is important because what you don't want is to reinvent the wheel again and again in a company. So ideally you would have some sort of scale effect that, for example, if you pilot something in customer service, you want to benefit from these learnings in, let's say, sales, with your sales agents, or you also want to benefit from these learnings in technology. But if you don't have the right governance in place, there is a huge danger of these efforts fragmenting, and therefore then everybody's reinventing the wheel, as I said, and building own pockets of experience. That is also important because you need to build experience, and that ideally is built once in a company for certain functions. I mentioned big data and analytic skills. You don't want to have big data analysts and data lakes that they exploit in various areas of the company. You would build that once. You want to build that once, and then make sure that people can, for different use cases, exploit the same thing. Those two elements are the ones that we see those efforts fail most. It's not so much in the technologies itself or the use cases or the partners, etc., because typically then when running such efforts, the individual use case pays off pretty quickly. But if it gets then to a too much fragmented scenario, there is then the feeling of efforts not being coordinated and not leveraged to the full potential.
Thank you very much, Olaf, for sharing with us this interesting and important topic.
Thanks, Salvatore. Indeed, a topic that is very close to my heart and I think indeed very important. And to the students, good luck with your course.